Hi folks, in this CLPL video my intention is to go through a couple of general points about how to use Google Meet and to touch on, I suppose, a few of the things that are going to be more important for you to do if you want to do some live lessons, as I know that that's something quite a few of you are keen to give a go. I've tried it a few times with classes myself and have found that in the right circumstances it can be quite beneficial, but I would also say there are some circumstances where it just really doesn't add an awful lot to the learning experience and can actually make it a bit more awkward. So, do make sure you give a little bit of consideration before you throw yourself into doing a live lesson as to whether it's actually going to be advantageous to what you're trying to do, But definitely worth giving it a go. So in this, want to go through the safeguarding document that you need to read, where you can find that, and the permission form, how you're going to get that to your pupils. So I've got some suggestions for how to keep that as simple as possible for yourself to organise. I'll go through how you create a meet, how you record them, controlling some basic stuff like your mic and video, sharing your screen in the meet, removing participants that shouldn't be there, and some other stuff that you'll find useful, hopefully. Some of this, I'm sure, if you've used Meet before, will not be new to you, so I'll try and find a balance between depth and experience when I'm going through it. So first of all, the safeguarding document, you must make sure you have read and understood this fully before you start doing any live lessons. I'm not going to talk about the contents of this here really, because it's simpler for you to just look at the document yourself. At some point, I expect this will go into our staff shared drive. However, in the meantime, I will attach a link because at the moment I know it's in draft format. I believe it's more or less done. I'm not sure if it's, how far off being completely finished it is though, but my understanding is that it's far enough along that it's okay for us to go ahead and use it at the moment. So you should use the link that I've attached in the email that I've sent this video around with to just basically find this, take some time to read it. It takes about 10 minutes or so to read, and then it's worth giving it another scan to make sure you're clear. One thing that I'll direct your attention to in particular, kind of scrolling right down to the bottom more or less, is that there's an exemplar contract for use with your classes. A colleague who was thinking about doing this has said that they've actually copied the part for what young people will do, and they've put that in the permission form, just to make sure that's been kind of stated at the outset. You could do that, or you could just go through it verbally with your class in your first meet, however you want to do it. But I would certainly say that you make those expectations nice and clear before you start. And down here you'll see there's a primary and secondary consent form. I'll use the secondary one. I think it's self-explanatory. If you're primary teacher, use the primary one. Now, when you click on that link, it will come up here saying make a copy. So you can't use the original, and that's fine though, because you actually want ideally to make a separate copy of this form for each of the classes you're going to use it for. So I'm just going to hit make a copy here. And up at the top here just says copy of Google Meet consent form secondary. What I would probably just do is call that Mr. Scott or something like that. And I'll maybe just take that secondary bit because I don't need that. And then I would choose where I wanted to put that in my drive. And what I'd do is I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call that folder Meet Consent Forms. I think I actually already made a folder for this purpose, but I'll just go through it again. So I'm going to move that file here, and that is going to be my template. So I'm not actually going to share this form with any classes. I'm going to make a copy of this form every time I want to share one with a class. And that allows me to keep my consent forms all separate so I can check them easily, rather than having it all muddled up with every pupil from all my classes all in one consent form. So if I have a wee look in my drive here, just refresh that because it might not have shown up yet. Meet consent forms, yeah, you'll see I've got two different folders. So I've already made one for the class I'm doing, but this is my demo one here. I'll maybe just call this demo. There we go, just so that I know which one to delete later on. Okay, so I'm ready to start using live lessons with my class. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here, take that file, right click on it, and make a copy. And this copy I'm going to rename. before I use it so that it's easy for me to find the right consent forms when I'm adding to classrooms or checking consent in future. So I'm going to go into here, I'm going to rename this form, and I'm going to call it example class. There we go. In your case, it might be 2P3 or whatever. And each time I do this for a new class, I'll just do the same thing. I'll come into here, I'll duplicate the form, and then I've got that form that I can use with my new class. So here's my example class. So I want to share that with that class just now. So I'm just going to go in here, and I'll create an assignment and just call it whatever I want to call it. Meet consent form. You could put a wee blurb in here explaining what it's for, or the contract information, or whatever you want to do, or just make it really clear that you want pupils to make sure that they mark this as done when it's turned in. We'll make that an ungraded assignment because we don't want it to be graded, and it's up to you whether you set a due date or a topic. I probably wouldn't put it in a topic. I'll just leave it sitting at the top of the classroom though. And in here we're now going to go add Google Drive, and if it's the last thing I edited, it should just come up first here, example class Mr. Scott, insert, and then we can just assign it. So that consent form has been assigned to my class. I might actually open it up and I'll just show you a couple of settings that you might want to consider changing from the default as it was created by the council. So if you go into the settings here, you'll see that for some reason it doesn't have anything about collecting email addresses. I suspect this is because for pupils who are younger, they would need a parent to fill it in, and so we couldn't restrict it by default, or it wouldn't be a good idea to do it by default for all pupils so that only Stirling Council accounts could do it, because then a parent couldn't actually use it. However, as I would imagine almost all of the pupils that you're going to be sharing this with, apart from maybe some really young S1 pupils, will be over that age and thus will be filling it in for themselves. I would personally just go to here and do restrict and collect email addresses and limit to one response. That just makes it nice and simple. It means that you can't accidentally end up having a pupil filling it in 2 or 3 times. It also means that when you go to the summary of who's filled it in, it breaks it down by school email address, so it's really quick and easy to scan through against your register and check if all your pupils have filled it in. Whereas if they haven't, it's a bit more time consuming to find who has actually completed it. So having done that, there's really not much else that you'd want to add in or change in your settings here. You could add response receipts if you want. It doesn't make much difference. So that's fine. Now in my classroom, I've signed into this classroom as a pupil, so this is me seeing the same class as a pupil. Now I can see meet consent form if I go into classroom, that's sitting up at the top here. And if I go in as a pupil, I can click on that and you'll see that it gives me a couple of options of who I am, put my name in, my year group, etc. There we go, I'll just say whatever. Yep, give my consent, submit, done. Right. Now, as a teacher, now that a pupil has done that, okay, so just imagine that we've gone back to this point here. Right, if I, so I've set this in my class, I can have a look at this assignment, and I'll see I've got 1 turned in. And if I have a look at the form, if you go to the edit icon down here, I mean, this is all just assuming you don't know how to use Google Forms already. If you know, then you'd probably skip this. But you go to responses, you can now see who has responded, and you can see all the email addresses of the pupils who responded. And assuming that all of them have said that they've given their consent, this circle will just be 100%. So it's nice and easy to check who's filled it in and whether they have actually given consent. So you need to do that before you can start using Meet. Now, showing you how to do it, to be honest, probably took longer than it actually would take to do it. It's actually only a 5-minute process. So please don't feel that that should put you off. It really doesn't take much time. And if you've got any questions, get in touch with me and I'll be happy to help. Likewise, if there's any questions about the safeguarding document, you could send them to me or possibly get in touch with Tracy Patrick, as I believe she has a kind of an overview of that and is in a position to maybe clarify or make any amendments as necessary. So Assuming we have now got all of our class to give their consent to be recorded as part of a Google Meet, what we're going to do is look at how we actually create a Meet in our classroom. So if you go into the settings, I've already done this, but if you go into your settings in Classroom, you'll find there's an option for Meet. You want to make sure that's ticked as visible for students and that there's a Meet code there. If that's not, just make sure it's ticked, because otherwise your pupils won't be able to actually find the Meet code when they want to join it. And that's pretty much all you need to do in terms of setup. As a teacher, you'll see the Meet code at the top here in the stream, and also in classwork, you'll see the little Meet icon there. And as a pupil, it is basically the same. So as a pupil, you'll see the Meet icon there, and likewise in classroom, provided, of course, your teacher has made it visible. Now, as a pupil, the reason we only are to make Meets through Classroom rather than just going to Google Meet, making a new one and sharing a link, is that it basically restricts the Meet so that pupils can only join it when you are there. So the pupils themselves can't all get together and go into a meet and do whatever they might do. So as a pupil here, if I try and click on this Meet, it will just tell me that I can't make one, I can't join it because there's no teacher there. So the pupils can't join that meet until you have. It's important when you're going to do a live lesson that you maybe let them know at what point you'll be creating and meeting, so that they don't try and join before you and then not be able to get in. So if you just go to Meet to create your meeting, and you've got some buttons down here for turning your microphone and your video camera on or off. I'll talk about them a little bit more later. So all you'd really do at this stage is just click Join Now. We can just ignore this because you won't need to share any of that because your pupils are joining it through Classroom anyway. Those are things that you would use to maybe share with, if you're doing a CLPL or something with other colleagues. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off my microphone because I'm going to join the same meet as a pupil. And if you've got basically yourself in the meeting twice, then you get really bad feedback. So I'm just going to turn the microphones in both of them off because I'm recording this in Screencastify anyway. So that says joined as a teacher. As a pupil, I can now click on this link and it should allow me now to open the meet. So as a pupil, I can join as well. You can hear the feedback, so I'll just turn off the microphone there. So that's me twice in the meeting, and the first thing that we'd want to do before we even add pupils, if possible, is to go down to the options here and to record the meeting. Now, I'm not going to actually record this meeting because I'm already recording it in Screencastify and I don't want to make my computer grind to a halt. But when you do that, it will come up with a thing just asking for consent to record. I'm just going to decline that now because I don't want to make a recording. And while you're recording, you'll see a little thing coming up on the screen down here that says that the meeting is being recorded, and you can click that when you want to stop recording it. Meet recordings are saved in your Google Drive. So just to show you where you'll find those, if we look through, it automatically makes a folder in your Google Drive called Meet Recordings. So any recorded meets you have will be in there. It also quite cleverly, for meets with more than 5 pupils, will give an attendance record. I think that's stored in here as well. Certainly there's a transcript if you've got captions as well. I wouldn't bother with it, to be honest, but it's up to you if you want to use it. I can't remember where the attendance record is in here or if it comes up at the end of the meeting for you. Unfortunately, because this demo one is less than 5 people, it wouldn't work anyway. But there is a way of keeping attendance kind of automatically. What I would always say is if you've recorded a meet, it's not a bad idea to maybe rename it, because the name of the meet is based on the meet code, which is just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. So you might want to rename the meet if it was a particular lesson, because if you want to share that meet to your classroom, it would make it a little bit easier for you to find the right meet when you come to do it. I would also say there tends to be a wee bit of a lag when it's recording, after it's finished recording, for it to save and process it into your drive. So don't expect to find it there immediately. It usually does take, in my experience, at least a few minutes, if not longer. So that's us covered the safeguarding document, the permission form, how to distribute it, how to start a meet through Classroom and why we do, how we record and find and name those recordings. So I'll just go through a couple of other things that are more pertinent to like actually using the meet itself. So one of the things that you'll see I've got in that list is sharing your screen. So down at the bottom of the page, you'll find that you've got an option called Present Now. And if you click that, you can choose what you want to present. So you can choose to present your entire screen, or if it's just a particular document, you could choose a tab, or if it's just that you wanted to share your web browser, you could share a window. So say I decided that I wanted just to share this document here, or maybe this one here. I can go to tab and choose that document and click share. That's fine. So that's what's being shared in my screen. And as a pupil, looking at that, you can see Mr. Scott's presenting and you can see only that tab. Whereas if I was to, let's go back to my meet here. If I was to stop presenting, and if I was to present my entire screen, I'll let me choose everyone. Just be really careful if you're doing that, of course, because it might have your emails up or CMS or something like that if you're in school. That's now me presenting my entire screen. So in this particular instance, because I'm recording myself, it's turned into a nice little infinite repetition, but you can see that it's showing my entire screen. So those are quite useful from an instructional point of view. Now, I'll stop presenting. As a pupil as well, so from a pupil's perspective, pupils do by default have the ability to present. So if you wanted pupils to maybe share a piece of work and discuss it as part of a lesson, that's entirely possible. You can ask pupils to present their screen, or if they're having trouble with something they're doing, they're not sure how to do something, you can maybe get them to present their screen to show you what's going on. So that's your screen sharing. It's really pretty straightforward. Just present now and then stop sharing when you want to. There are quite a few other options that we can have a look through as well. One of the things that you'll quite often have to do is, well, maybe you probably won't have to do it very often, but you might have to do is to remove participants. So in your meet, down the side here, if you have a look, sorry, I said down the side, up at the top at the right hand side, we've got show everyone, and that shows me a list of all the participants, and it allows me, if I click on the wee three dots here, to remove somebody from the meeting. So if somebody's carrying on or they've shared something inappropriate, you can obviously remove them using that method. And at the end of the meet, it's really important you make sure pupils have all left the meet before you finish it, because if they're still in it after you leave, then the meet remains open and others, I think, may then be able to join it. I can't imagine many people have much inclination to do that anyway, but as I say, it's good practice to make sure that you are always the last person to leave. So this is an easy way for you to check that you're the last person left. And if anyone's forgotten to leave, you can just kick them out before you finish up. You should probably hang on about 30 seconds to a minute afterwards just to check no one rejoins. And at that point, you can then leave. And, that's your meeting essentially ended as far as the pupils are concerned. So a couple of other things that we want to maybe have a look at. First, I'll just talk about the chat. So in Meet, you actually have a wee kind of chat bar down at the side, and you can choose whether you want to let people send messages or not. So as a pupil, I might have a question, and I don't really want to kind of interrupt you, so I'm just going to put a wee thing up. And as a teacher, I've got that little message appearing here down the sidebar. There are other things that pupils can do that you might want to encourage them to be aware of. Like one of which is I'll show you the hand raising first, then we'll come back to display options. So for a pupil, if they're unsure about something, you can encourage them, if they want to maybe ask a question or stop you, that they can click the wee raise hand button. And from a teacher's point of view, you get a wee notification saying a pupil has raised their hand. And if you were to change your view settings, if you change it to a grid view, let's just see, why is that not coming up? There we go. If we change it to a grid view, you can see that down here the pupil's hand is up. I know that's me, but that's me as a pupil over there on the right. And there's a wee icon with their hand up. So if you've got a class, I mean, your grid will have more people on it than that. And it'll just allow you to see that maybe that person has a question. And you can remove your hand up or lower your hand by clicking that, and that's you. Your question has been answered. You can take your hand back down. Now I said I'd come back to blurring your screen. So what you might want to do is change your background. If you're working from home and you don't want people to see your background, you can choose to either blur your background slightly or significantly. So if you look on this one on the left-hand side, you'll see that the background's really all blurred away. You can also choose to add these kind of snazzy backgrounds, which have maybe a less than perfect effect, but do certainly mask your background. However, what I would say is when using, say, a Chromebook or something that's not a tremendously fast computer or working over a relatively slow internet connection, you will find that can slow the kind of stream down and make it seem quite jittery. So I wouldn't use that unless there's a good reason to, basically. It's there as an option, but you might want to avoid using it unless you really need to. So continuing on, a couple of other things that we might want to talk about. I'll tell you what, I'll just kind of go through some of the options in general. So up at the top here, we've got the list of who's our participant that we can see. So I'll go back to the teacher's view. I'm getting myself mixed up. Too many things going on. So we can change the way that the participants appear. I'm not going to go through all the options, but if you read it, it's fairly self-explanatory. So if you want to change how things are appearing, whether it's a grid view or if it just highlights whoever's speaking, that's all in there. You've got your list of people that we talked about. You've got your chat sidebar. You've got your activities, which is actually potentially really handy. There's some guidance in the safeguarding document about breakout rooms. The short version is at the moment don't use them unless you've got extra teachers who can be in the separate rooms. So I'm not going to go into that. I don't think anyone's likely to use it in the short term. But we do have things like polls. So this is a really good way of maybe doing some recheck-in questions where you can create a really simple little question and some different options. Or you can do a Q&A. So if you enable a Q&A, your participants will see down here that they can ask a question, and they can click that to type in their question. They can see other questions that people have asked. And so if you were at the point in a lesson where you maybe wanted to open up for discussion, that might be a good way to manage it. So you can, rather than people feel like they need to speak in the meet, I've found personally in my experience that sometimes people can be quite shy actually to unmute themselves and talk. So you might want to use that as an alternative method of getting people to kind of leave any questions or suggestions, and it allows you to just kind of quite easily work through them. So those are all up there. Your other options down here, if we go into there, we've got a record meeting, which we've talked about, change layout, just kind of similar to up here, but it gives us some more options for how we change the layout. And if you've got a large number of pupils in a class, I find this really quite useful if everyone's connection is quick enough, because you can slide that up and it allows you to have as many as 50 people more or less all in tiles on the page. So instead of only having 9 of your 20 pupils up, you can slide that up there so that you can have up to 30 people or up to 60. Play around with that, figure out what works for you. We've talked about change background. Captions, if we turn that on, what captions we'll try and do is, in theory, they should copy what you're saying. So I can't really make it work easily without having a lot of feedback because I'm recording myself. But if my microphone was turned on, I would get captions appearing here. It would try and automatically copy what I was saying. Again, you might want to use that, you might not. I certainly don't find it very useful, but just to make you aware it's there. And when captions is on, I think you get a transcript saved in the Meet Recordings folder. You can't use a phone for audio. I'm not even going to go into why you would want to, but it's a US only option. And then these, I think, are all fairly self-explanatory. If you go into settings, You get some choices about audio and video in terms of what microphone and camera you're going to use. And you'll also see you've got access to host controls there, which allows you to change some permissions for what other people in the meeting can do. That's also accessible down here. Now, the only thing that's in there that I think I didn't touch on so far is Jamboard. Now, I've played around with this with pupils and found it can be quite effective if you understand its limitations. Long story short, Jamboard is like an interactive whiteboard that lots of people can either just view or that they can all collaborate on at the same time. So if you click Jamboard in here as the meeting creator and start a new whiteboard, it will create a brand new blank whiteboard. Equally, you could choose one you already have created. So if you wanted to use a kind of a whiteboard that maybe already had a passage of text on it that you wanted people to leave notes about, or maybe had an image or something you wanted them to discuss, you could create it in advance in your Google Drive by just going to New, More, and in there you should find that you can create Jamboards. That's a whole separate thing in itself, so I'm not going to get into how you make Jamboards, but I'm just going to show you as an example. If I choose a Jamboard from my drive, and there's one that I was using with a higher class not that long ago, so I'm going to open that Jam, and what it'll do for me is it'll open it up in another window, so it's just kind of floating about there. It doesn't take over the Meet as such, but it is there. And for participants in my Meet, they get a wee notification that pops up. But if they go into the comment thread, you'll see it says, Mr. Scott is your Jam file with a meeting. So if your pupils aren't able to find it, just tell them to go into the comments and click on that link, and their meeting won't disappear. It will just open in a new tab. Okay. So if they wanted, they could drag that out separately and put that on one side of their screen and have that over here, or not. It's up to you or your pupils how you want to have things on your page. But at the moment, the default is generally that pupils have view-only access unless you've set it up already to be editable by them. So we'll go back to me as a teacher, and here's my Jam with me signed in as a teacher. I can see that pupil's looking at it, but they don't have access. So I have all these tools here to edit it, and my pupil does not. They can just see it. So if I change things, they can see those changes. Like if I go in here and add a post-it note, the pupil can see that, but they can't do anything with it. So if I wanted them to be able to engage with that work, so like this task here, the intention was that on these pages we had different examples of graphic design, and pupils were basically to leave comments talking about how different elements and principles were evident within that. So for pupils to be able to do that, I need to go in here to share, and I would need to go to down here where it says everyone in this group can view. We want to change that so that instead of viewer, it's editor. And then all we need to do is just click done. And now it won't immediately change anything for the pupil. But as soon as they refresh the page, if you just tell them all to refresh at that point, they will now have access to these tools. So they can add sticky notes or drop in images, circle things. They can use a highlighter. So if you go into the pen tool, there's a highlighter there. They can kind of go in there. So as a teacher, you can see what your pupils are doing. To some degree, I would say it's probably not a great tool to use for lower school pupils who might be a bit less mature, but for seniors it works quite well. So you can see as the teacher more or less live who's doing what. And if you look at this little, I'm just going to come out of here because I think it's maybe going to get a bit confusing having too many of the same thing up at one time. There we go. Try again. There we go. As a teacher, so say this is you in your Google Meet. Up at the top here, you've got this list of all your different slides in your Jam. So you can actually see which slide each pupil is looking at, and you can switch between them quite easily. I don't want to get too bogged down in how to make a Jamboard and how they work. That's probably for a totally separate video. But the option is there, I guess would be the simplest way of putting it. So in terms of our intentions with this, I think we've covered everything in terms of how to use the most common features of Meet. So if we were finished, let me just get back to where I wanted to be here. If we were finished our Meet, we would just say to our pupils, okay, can you please make sure that you leave the Meet, and the pupil would then need to go down here to hang up. They need to click this button to leave. Something I'll maybe mention actually, just while it occurs to me, pupils are entitled to turn off their microphone and camera so they could participate quite passively. So if you click that little icon there, that turns off your camera. And as a teacher now, I just see an icon for that pupil. There are some shortcuts to turn your microphone on and off. You'll see them highlighted there, Control D and Control E. So it's worth using those because you might want to ask pupils to mute their microphones when they don't need to speak, so that you don't get all the background noise of what might be happening at home kind of interrupting the feed. But yeah, you'd ask your pupils to leave. They can click Leave Call. And as a teacher, you can just check here, right, that's fine, all the pupils are gone. So you can then leave that Meet as well. And if you've been recording the Meet, the Meet recording will end automatically at that stage, and that's when you can start looking for the Meet recording. Sorry, my dog's going a bit nuts downstairs. Now, that's really, I think, all I can offer at this stage. I mean, there are probably other things I could say, but it's probably been a long enough video at that point that I don't want to go into anything else. If you have any questions, though, do please let me know. I'll be happy to try and add any further advice as necessary.